Go ahead and be seated. Good morning.
Good morning.
So today we start the season of Advent. It is Advent 1, the beginning of our new year. And I love Advent. I love Advent. And I love it because it forces us to just stop and to be still for a little bit. It is the beginning of a season of waiting. Now, I love Advent, but I hate to wait. I hate surprises, whether it's good or whether it's bad. I don't want to be surprised. I don't want to wait for it. Just give it to me right now. Waiting feels really uncomfortable. It feels unproductive. And I think that in our culture, we're taught that we need to always be moving forward. We need to always be achieving or producing something, right? Even our hobbies have goals. We count our steps. We count the number of books or pages we read on vacation, speaking to the one in the back who just read in Hawaii, or we count the number of hats that we have knitted. It is just hard to be. But Advent invites us into something really different. It's a waiting that is still, and it is a waiting that is quiet. It's a waiting that helps us notice how God's presence is breaking into our lives. In today's gospel, Jesus speaks of the sun and the moon and the stars, roaring seas, and the distress of nations, right? It's like a super chaotic and unsettling picture. And yet, amidst all the turmoil, Jesus says, stand up, raise up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. It is not a call for panic. And he does not give us a directive to fix the chaos of this whole world all on our own. It's a call to hope. This hope, it's not passive and it's not a naive optimism. It's this active posture of trust in God's faithfulness. It's a readiness to perceive the light that God is already birthing in the midst of the darkness. And when we think about waiting, we do often think of it being very idle, as this holding pattern. But I think that the waiting of Advent is not. It is not idle. It's a stillness that invites us to open our hearts to God's quiet work in our lives. Thomas Merton once wrote, Advent is the beginning of the end of all in us that is not yet Christ. I think this is the hope of Advent, that even as we wait, that God is working within us, shaping us, and preparing us to receive the light of Christ. But to perceive this work that is already happening, we must quiet the noise of our lives. Jesus says in today's gospel, heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away. And I think this is the assurance that is at the heart of our waiting. Our hope, it's not based on our ability to prepare perfectly or to predict the future. It's grounded in God's unchanging promise. And this is what Advent teaches us. God has already acted decisively in history through the incarnation, right? And the incarnation, the birth of Jesus, it was not just some past event. It was the breaking of God into this kingdom. It was the breaking in of God's kingdom into this world, a kingdom that continues to unfold even now. I love Karl Barth, and he reminds us that the incarnation is God's great yes to humanity. It's one of my favorite quotes. The incarnation is God's great yes to humanity. It is the assurance that God is with us, working in ways that we cannot yet see. The world may feel unsteady, but God's promises are not. Even when our circumstances are unclear, and even when the signs of redemption feel really distant, God's faithfulness, it remains. And this is why we wait. We wait not with fear or with doubt, but with hope, trusting that God's light is already at work, even in the hidden corners of our lives. And waiting isn't easy, and especially when it doesn't look the way that we think it should. The German mystic Meister Eckhart says an important thing here. He wrote, "To experience God, we must let go of our expectations." He said, "We must empty ourselves in order to let God work in us." I think it's easy to approach Advent with a checklist, right? We have, here are all the traditions that we want to keep, here are the outcomes that we want to hope for, and even the ways that we expect for God to show up. But God rarely works within the confines of our expectations. The people of Jesus' time, they expected a warrior king, but God came as a child. They expected power, but God came in humility. Advent invites us to let go of these rigid ideas and open ourselves to the surprising ways that God's light might break through. This requires surrender and a willingness to release control and to trust in the mystery of God at work. So we don't always know what we're waiting for, but perhaps that's the point. The beauty of Advent is not having all of the answers, but it's in creating space that allows God to surprise us. Hope is not born in certainty, but in trust, and the quiet confidence that life in God is always more beautiful and more transformative than we can imagine. And one of the most profound truths of Advent is that hope requires us to embrace mystery. In our daily lives, we often resist mystery because we want clarity, certainty, and control. But God's work, it usually doesn't come with very clear instructions. Advent calls us to rest in mystery, to trust that even when we cannot see the full picture, God is with us, bringing the light to the hidden places of our hearts of the world. And this is the paradox of hope. It flourishes not in the answers, but in the questions. It grows when we let go of our need to understand everything, and when we open ourselves to the wonder of what God is doing. So if we want hope to take root in our lives, we must nurture it. And I want to talk about two different practices that I think can help us do that. And I know I just spent this whole time saying that we're too busy and too distracted and too driven by productivity. And now I'm going to suggest that you add two more things. But I don't think these are just another task. And I don't think that they're just something to fit into your crowded schedule. But the practices, they're not about doing more. They're about creating space to be. So the first is to create intentional moments of stillness where you can simply be with God. So these moments do not have to be long, and they don't have to be elaborate. It might look like just sitting in silence for even 5 minutes in the morning. Maybe it's lighting a candle before dinner, or just taking kind of a meditative walk in nature. This practice matters because it helps us notice. When our lives are cluttered with noise and activity and busyness, we just can miss the subtle ways that God is working in the world around us. Stillness allows us to pay attention and to listen, to sense the light that is already present in our lives. So it's in these quiet spaces that hope begins to grow, not as a fleeting feeling, but as a deep trust in God's promise and presence. So this week I invite you to make space. Start small. And don't worry about doing it perfectly. Just carve out a little bit of time and quiet your soul and to be present with God. If you want a little help to do this, you can sign up for our Advent devotional. There is a sign up in the back. It looks like this. It's not in the back, it's in my hand. It will be in the back. So we're going to do a devotional during Advent Monday through Friday. An email will go out, and when you wake up, it'll be there. And there's a prompt for inviting some stillness and contemplative practices into your life. So if you're interested, we have about 100 people who've signed up. So if you want to sign up, go ahead and do that, and I will add you to the list. But it might be, if finding contemplative practice and stillness is not something that comes supernatural, sometimes it helps just to get that prompt, to carve out that extra time. So if that's helpful, do that. The second practice is about release. It's letting go of rigid expectations that we place on ourselves, on others, and on God. So we all carry these expectations, often without realizing it. We want things to go a certain way. We want people to behave in certain ways, and we want God to show up in ways that feel predictable and comfortable. Doesn't work that way very often. Letting go of expectations, it's not about lowering our hopes or resigning ourselves to disappointment. So I want to be clear about that. It's opening our hearts to the surprising ways that God might already be working in our lives. It's about releasing the need to control every outcome and trusting that God is at work in the world around us, in our lives, and in the lives of the people that we are with. And this practice matters because it frees us to experience the fullness of God's presence. When we hold too tightly to our expectations, we often miss the beauty of what God is actually doing. Letting go allows us to step into the mystery of God's work and to be surprised and to be transformed. So here are a few questions to reflect on this week. I know there's a lot of homework this week. Advent. What expectations are you holding on to that might keep you from noticing God's presence? Are you expecting life to look a certain way? Are you expecting God to show up in a way that feels familiar or safe? And what might it look like to release those expectations and trust God to work in new and unexpected ways? So Advent, it is not about perfection or productivity. It's about presence. It's about waiting in hope. Not a passive, resigned waiting, but an active, open posture of trust in God's faithfulness. So as we make space for God and we release our expectations, my prayer is that we will discover hope growing quietly in the hidden places of our lives, like a seed waiting to sprout.